I'm now joined by Dorval Carter, president of the Chicago Transit Authority, who is one of the pioneers to sign the Infrastructure Equity Pledge, which vows to grant contracting opportunities to historically underutilized businesses. We spoke a short time ago. Dorval Carter, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I first wanted to ask you, what have you learned from the pandemic? It's obviously disrupted the nation, the world. What did it mean for your job in Chicago?
Well, I think for me and just about any other transit system, the pandemic was literally a game changer for the way that we do business. In my particular case, we had an 80% drop in our ridership in a matter of a couple of days, along with the corresponding revenue. So we went into crisis management mode almost immediately. And as I've told people in the past, there was no playbook for how to deal with a pandemic in public transit. And so we were literally sort of building a plane as we were flying it. From a leadership standpoint, it was probably the biggest leadership challenge that I've ever taken on. And from an agency standpoint, our primary focus was on how to continue to deliver service and how to protect our employees from the impact of this virus that was literally ravaging, throughout the country.
And what about ridership and how you got through it? Has it returned? And are you optimistic that in the future? Obviously, we now have vaccines, but still people are getting COVID.
Yeah, it's been an interesting progression. Before the pandemic, CTA was carrying about 1.4 million people a day. At the height of the shutdown, our ridership had dropped to a little bit under 200,000 a day. Which I would point out was still a lot of people. Since that time, our ridership has grown to a little bit over 600,000 a day, and so we have seen a steady progression, an increase in our ridership, and so we're optimistic that ridership will continue to grow. But we are obviously watching very closely in terms of what the final sort of ceiling is going to be, particularly given all the other changes that have happened in general with regards to people returning to work and working from home and the other things we're seeing affect mobility in a city like Chicago.
Whether it's at the federal or state level, whether it's infrastructure or other industries, as you know, a lot of times it's who you know as far as getting contracts and that kind of thing. But you were instrumental in signing an equity pledge. And I wanted to ask you about that. Why did you sign that equity pledge? And what are the barriers facing minority-owned businesses?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I signed it is that I thought the equity and infrastructure project really represented something that I've been focused on over my almost 40 years worth of service in this industry. We have always viewed our responsibility here at CTA as more than just moving people. It's about serving communities and really connecting and leveraging the federal and state dollars that we get to help support the communities that we serve. So the equity and infrastructure project really was a parallel to something that I believed in strongly and was quite honestly honored to be asked to be one of the leading founders of that movement, to really take advantage of a historic level of funding that has been provided to us by the federal government and using it in a way that actually opens up access to and helps, as you pointed out, reduce the barriers that have significantly impacted how minority and disadvantaged businesses have been able to access these types of funds and projects in the past.
As far as transportation, as you know, we're in very polarizing times. It used to be healthcare and taxes always a kind of a partisan battle, no matter what the decade. Education and definitely transportation was more bipartisan. And getting the transportation bill to President Biden's desk was very difficult. It was a bipartisan bill, but it wasn't easy. I was skeptical it was going to happen, but it did. What does that now law mean for CTA? And are you optimistic that the parties are going to be able to build upon that success?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Having worked at the federal level in the Obama administration, and over the course of my career, historically, transportation has been a bipartisan issue. Building bridges, buying trains, improving infrastructure is something that benefits both blue and red constituents alike. And I think that, we did have our challenges with this particular infrastructure bill, not so much because of, I think, the underlying principles of improving the country's infrastructure, but I think because of the size of the bill that was ultimately passed, and for which we're extremely grateful. For an agency like CTA, we're probably going to see probably about an extra $600 million in just the formula funding that will come to this city as a result of the infrastructure bill itself, which is a significant increase in funding. And that doesn't include our ability to access many of the discretionary programs that are also part of the bill that will just add to that total. So from my perspective, this is a game changer type of piece of legislation. Agencies like mine, particularly older transit systems, have a huge backlog of unmet capital needs just to get to a state of good repair. And this will significantly impact that backlog in a positive way. It will allow the city of Chicago and the Chicago Transit Authority to really move a large number of projects that will benefit a lot of the communities here that deserve better, more efficient, and improved transit services.
As far as the battle on climate change, we've seen both with the transportation bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen a piece of legislation that have become law that attack climate change. How do you think, what are the solutions? Electric vehicles, mass transit? Do you see us getting on a path where we're getting in our gas powered cars less?
Well, I think the first solution is properly funding and supporting public transportation. Regardless of whether we're operating zero emission buses like electric buses or low emission diesel buses, that's still a better alternative than the single occupancy vehicle. It will still reduce congestion, it will still improve the climate, and it will still provide for a better quality of living in the communities that we serve. I don't know that there's any real right answer to your question from a transit standpoint. Clearly, supporting transit does have a environmental benefit to the cities that we operate in, as well as the rural areas that the industry operates in. But it's not cheap. And really, the never-ending conversation around public transportation is both the cost of maintaining it, and then ultimately the issue around fares. How much should people pay for it? Ideally, in a utopia world, you could offer free public transit to anyone who would need it. Realistically, we have to pay the bills, and so that requires us to pay, to charge fares and to ultimately impact, sometimes in a negative way, those who can least afford it, because of the lack of funding that we have to support the operations of an agency of our size.
We've seen in recent polls, there was concern about COVID as a top issue, but that has slipped now, and it's more inflation and gas prices. But among the top issues is also crime. What is the CTA doing to combat crime, and what do you think are the keys to making sure that riders feel safe?
Well, there's no question that if I want to get my ridership back, I have to make sure that they feel safe on our system. And I think it's really important to point out that public transit agencies don't operate in a vacuum. We are reflective of the communities that we serve. And to the extent that there are crime issues in a broader sense in any major metropolitan area, you're going to see that reflected on the public transit system itself. What we do and what we believe is important is to create a perception of safety for our customers. And what that means is having high visibility through police, the police themselves, through security guards, through other tools that we have, including increased lighting, infrastructure investments around cameras and monitors and other things that allow us to do the best that we can to mitigate the potential situation of crime occurring on a public transit system. At CTA, crime is relatively low compared to what you may see in normal urban environments. However, having said that, one crime is one too many. And obviously to the person who has been a victim of that crime, it is a very serious issue. And we have to show the public that we are both committed to addressing those issues and are dedicated to supporting the efforts that are necessary to reduce crime on public transit.
Last question. I wanted to get to tap into your expertise, both at the local and the federal level. As you mentioned, you worked in the Obama administration, and you've worked at the local level, obviously. Some people just work at the local level or they work in Washington. What is the value of having both experiences?
Well, understanding both the practical realities of what it means to have the funding necessary to make a difference in people's lives is certainly what I gain at the local level, where I'm boots on the ground. I'm seeing the impact of public transit every day. Being able to tie that together with the policies that ultimately support that effort, which is what I did at the federal level, I think has really given me a unique and broad experience in that not only do I know what kind of policies are most effective, but I also understand how the funding works and where the funding opportunities are for an agency like mine. And so to me, it's the opportunity to have the best of both worlds, both seeing the big picture while also understanding at the micro level what that big picture represents. And I think ultimately that gets you the best opportunity to provide the best service that we can for the city of Chicago.
That makes sense. Dorval Carter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.